Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hyfi Preschooling Kids Weekly Training Podcast. We are so excited that you are all joining us. And joining me, I have part of the Hyfi team, Crystal and Kayla. How are you all doing today?
Doing good, Isaac. How about you?
I'm doing so well. Kayla, how are you?
I'm great. I'm getting ready for the weekend and enjoying some great fall weather. What could be better?
Absolutely. Well, we are continuing the truth of I am forgiven and God forgives me with the theme of switch it up and 1, 2, 3, God forgives me for preschool. This has been such a fun truth already through 1 week. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in how we can be forgiven. But before we jump too deep into that, Crystal, Kayla, I have a question for both of you. So today's Bible story talks about siblings and some of the maybe worst memories of having a sibling. But I want to ask you, do you have a fun memory with a sibling maybe growing up?
That's fun. So I have one sibling who is older than me, and we always had a lot of fun together as kids. Definitely had a lot of adventures that we went on. And I will say it wasn't a fun memory at the time, but I feel like it is a family story now that we look back on and retell and laugh about often. And it's the story of when my brother and I decided to be adventurous and to go walking in the woods behind our house. And while we were out walking in the woods, my brother accidentally stepped on a yellow jacket's nest that was it was in the ground. Like he couldn't see it, didn't know. And so it's me and my brother and our dog, and we're like these little adventurers out in the woods, and this not great thing happens, right? And to this day, I stand by this. I got scared and wanted to go get help. And so I immediately took off running with the dog to go get help. His version
Did
of
you
the
abandon
story
him?
I just abandoned him in the woods, and I just left him in the woods and ran away. So to this day, I still defend my part of the story. Thankfully, he is A-okay. It was not a great memory at the time, but we still have different versions of what happened in that story as adults.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. You know what? Knowing you, Kayla, I'm sure you were going to get help. 100%. 100%.
Absolutely, I was.
Crystal, what about you?
That is so fun. Well, first off, Kayla, I guess I didn't even we've been friends for a couple years now. I didn't know that you just have one brother and that you're the younger sister. I also only have one brother and I'm the younger sister. So fun little look. We're always finding things we have in common. Fun facts. Okay, so I have a fun story. Nobody's judging me here. Nobody's going to judge me. I was little,
Judgment-free zone.
Old enough to know better. But I found a book of matches, and I thought it would be fun to light the matches and put them out because you make that and then they light. I blow them out. I did that with the whole book of matches. Lit them each one by one. So my mother found all of these burnt matches and she swore it was my brother. And she got so mad at him. And I just sat and I listened to him get in trouble and I didn't say a word. And so probably about 15 years ago, my brother and I are both adults now. We're sitting together and I said, "Hey, Mom, do you remember when you found all those burnt matches and you got so mad at Dana?" And he just looks at me. And I said, "Yeah, it was me." And Dana's like, "I told you it was her. You didn't believe me." And he still remembered so vividly. And my mom was kind of like, "Oh no, I don't remember that." But my brother you could tell he was like, "Vindication."
That's amazing.
It was good times. It was good times.
I'm not going to lie. That must be a younger sister thing because I have 3 younger sisters and we were having a family FaceTime the other day and one of my sisters confessed that she outed me for something And this was like 6 years ago. And I'm like, come on. So it must be a younger sister to older brother thing for
Gotta
It's
sure.
love
what
those
we
younger sisters.
it's what we do.
Yeah, as the older brother, I don't love it as much, but I do love the stories. Well, with all these stories, sometimes growing up with siblings, we do need forgiveness. Not everything is
Mhm.
perfect. And today we are going to be looking at the main idea of I can be forgiven. Now, you may remember last week that we talked about how we need to be forgiven. And this week is all about how we can be forgiven. And you might be looking at the outline, you might be looking at this week's lesson and thinking, what's the difference? Well, to explain that to you, we have resident expert Crystal Mazuka.
Oh goodness.
Crystal, can you help us understand what is this difference between I can be forgiven and I need to be forgiven that we're going to see this week in the lesson?
I think it's funny that you call me resident expert because I feel like the only reason I know the answer is because of how much we wrestled with this as we were creating this. We really felt strongly that it would be important to talk about both of these. Last week was so much about that need for forgiveness that we all have because we all sin. We've all made wrong choices that break our relationship with God. We need forgiveness in order to have that relationship with God again. But the thing is that this idea of we can be forgiven talks a little bit more about the truth that we continue to make wrong choices even after that moment that we have where we know that God has forgiven us. Jesus has made a way, our relationship is repaired, it is restored, we are made new, and yet we continue to make these choices. And so this week we really get a focus on the truth that we cannot outsin God. The story of Jacob and Esau, I always am amazed reading about the life of Jacob and thinking, this is the guy that we're supposed to like, he's talked about as a hero of the faith. He's he makes a lot of pretty terrible choices, and specifically towards his brother Esau. Like their whole lives, they are living in contention. And I'm sure Esau was not perfect. We know he was not perfect. Yet the Bible really highlights Jacob's wrong choices specifically toward his brother. And so this week, we really get to focus on the part of the story where God calls Jacob to return to his homeland after he has fled, having made, again, a lot of wrong choices towards his brother. He's done him dirty, as we like to say. And yet God calls him and says, you need to go. And we kind of think about what would he have been feeling like. He ends up sending this whole parade of people wanting to make sure everything is going to be okay. And we see this beautiful moment where Esau just embraces him and he's like, my brother is back. Now, Jacob, like, realized he couldn't out sin this moment of love and restoration. And kids can know that even though through our whole lives we will continue to make these wrong choices, we can be forgiven. We can be forgiven. There is nothing that you can do that is unforgivable. And so I just think it's such a good reminder for kids and preschoolers. You can be forgiven.
That's so true, Crystal. And as we look at this main idea that we not only need forgiveness, but we can be forgiven each and every day, each and every moment, each and every second. It reminds us of God's love for us. When we look at the Bible and say that God is love, that is a fact that we are remembered through this truth. And a lot of the times in this story, we see that okay, Esau forgave Jacob. All right, Jacob needed forgiveness from his brother. All right, these
Mhm.
were two people here on earth that they had to forgive each other. It was like a one-to-one forgiveness there. But but Kayla, how can we help kids and preschoolers know that, hey, yes, we can forgive others, but more importantly, we can be forgiven by God from the forgiveness found in Jesus?
Yeah, I think kind of like what Crystal was saying with this story. one of the reasons we wanted to lean into this one is because we're talking about that I don't deserve this part of
Mm.
forgiveness.
Mhm.
And so when you look at Jacob's story, and there's a lot to Jacob's story. So leaders, we can't cover everything in the session that we're going to be talking about. I
We really
really
wanted
encourage
to.
you. We tried hard, but we couldn't. Um, I really do encourage you to go back and read the text of Jacob's story from beginning to end. It'll take a little time because it's a big story. There's a
Mhm.
lot that's happening, not only from the very beginning with the birthright and, Jacob leaving and, how Rebecca and Isaac play into that. I really encourage you guys to go back and really read the text and the whole story of Jacob's life. There's so much in there, and there's a lot of details that we chose to leave out.
Mhm.
Things like, you know, how, there's multiple wives that are in this story, and the different wrongs that happen, and Laban, and there's just a lot happening in the story that really overtly shows like the need for forgiveness, and that how we can be forgiven by God, or can be forgiven as well. But with this one in particular, what I really like to lean in on is Jacob's response, and how like it's the Lord who comes to him and says, "Go home. Like now is the
Mhm.
time for you to go back home." And
Mhm.
so he is obedient to the Lord. He listens, he obeys, he follows the Lord, he does what he says. All that time having no idea, complete uncertainty about his brother on the other side.
Mm.
And is he going to extend forgiveness to him? He sends a messenger ahead of time, and then we get this, Esau's coming with his 400, best friends, and it sounds like he's coming to do battle. And so now Jacob is trying to rescue and protect his family, and just that unknown that we see with that ability when Jacob, or when Esau comes and just embraces and loves his brother. um and I think part of that with talking with kids about how we can be forgiven by God is at an even greater level. There's a level of uncertainty that Jacob has when he's coming home to see his brother, to not know how he's going to respond. We don't have that same
Mm.
relationship when we look towards
Mhm.
Jesus and we look towards our Father. Like, we can know with certainty the lavish love that God has for us. And so looking at a
Amen.
human relationship, we can talk about how we can be forgiven by other people, but we also can be forgiven by God. And how much more can we see the love that God has for us and the forgiveness that he gives us, and
Mhm.
just giving that confidence and that certainty to kids and preschoolers that as we come to the Lord, as we ask for forgiveness, we can be reminded we can be forgiven, and God is ready and waiting to forgive us. In a similar way, Esau was there, ready and waiting, coming to forgive his brother, to embrace him. And so I think there's some really cool connections we can make in this particular story about how we can be forgiven by God.
Mhm.
For sure. I love that Jacob didn't do anything to earn Esau's forgiveness. He didn't send a bunch,
Mhm.
like, he didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you." He didn't deserve any of it, but it was because of Esau's love and forgiveness towards his brother that he was forgiven. I mean,
Mhm.
Jacob had a laundry list of things that he was coming before Esau had done. He had tricked his father, he had stolen a birthright, he had run away. There were so many things that he came before his brother and said, "Hey, will you forgive me?" And he was forgiven. And I just love
Mhm.
that picture. I love that picture of Esau going to his brother to forgiving him, because that is the picture of God in our lives, because we all need this forgiveness. And sometimes as we are teaching, or sometimes we have teachers in our ministry, that honestly, teaching forgiveness, it can be a struggle. It can be difficult, because it's hard to teach forgiveness when you're at a moment where you feel like you need forgiveness, where you feel like you have this laundry list of things that you are feeling guilt or feeling shame about.
Mhm.
But the good news is that we can take all of that to God. We can take all of that before Him. So, Crystal, Kayla, I want to open it to you. What are some ways maybe that you have helped a leader or helped a family member through a time where they felt like there was a laundry list of things that they had to check off before they could be forgiven?
Yeah, so we just recently at our church had a leader who was going through something really difficult. And you could tell that the weight of what she was going on through was really causing her to question, causing her to doubt, causing her to struggle in leadership. And so it was two things that we were able to do with this leader. Number one, just getting to have conversations and saying, listen, it is okay. Like, y- things have happened, choices were made, and yet there is grace, there is love, and there is forgiveness. Nobody here is judging you. Nobody here is saying that you are unqualified to lead and to serve. And so please, please, please do not let yourself be weighed down by guilt and shame. But then we said, number two, take some time. Take
Mm,
some time before the Lord. Take some time, you and Him, and just find that healing, experience that forgiveness, and walk in that. And so I think that's really what she needed in that season. Number one was to hear nobody here is holding anything against you, nobody here is mad at you. Like, know that there is so much love, grace, and
mhm,
forgiveness available both from God and from people. But number two, you don't have to stay in this space where you are struggling and also trying to lead. Take a season away from leadership and just be with the Lord. And she came back like stronger, more passionate, ready to lead. And it's just been so great to see as she recognized that she could be forgiven.
mm,
And she could spend time in that, because we don't always talk about that. Like, we say that you can be forgiven, but it's not like that forgiveness impacts you just like that. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time, because forgiveness leads to healing, healing with our relationship with the Lord. And she needed that. And so, really giving leaders the space and the time to be able to really just love the Lord in that moment of forgiveness and find that healing that they need.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And I think kind of alongside that, Crystal, like even if it's not something big overt, like even if it's the small stuff, I think we all can get really caught up in believing lies of who we are based on our performance or based on what we've
Hmm.
done.
Hmm.
And I think that continual renewal, just renewing our minds, reminding ourselves who we are, not what we've done.
Hmm.
And continuing to really kind of speak the gospel over ourselves and be reminded of our identity in Christ, to be reminded of who we are because of who He is and who He
mhm,
says that we are, not because of what we've done. And so I think there's freedom, and there's just so much healing, like you were saying, of just being reminded of, yes, I did this. Yes, I am not perfect. Yes, this happened. And I am forgiven.
Hmm.
And really standing in, which is what we're teaching kids and preschoolers all month, like standing in that truth of, I am forgiven. I am not what I was. That is not being held over me anymore. Like, that healing, that forgiveness is full and complete. I don't have to go back to it. I don't have to live in it. I get to live freely because I know that my forgiveness and my identity is in who Jesus says I am, not in who I
Hmm.
say I am or think I am or what I think on and ruminate on. So I think, just like you were saying, just running back to scripture and being reminded and speaking those truths over yourself, and really calling out who you are in Christ, really helps free you to live into the forgiveness that you've already been given.
Hmm.
for sure. I love that you talked about that identity piece because it is such a cornerstone of what Hyfi is. Because each
Hmm.
month in Hyfi, we want kids to discover their identity, not the identity that they have for themselves, not the identity that the world says they are, but the identity that God has given to him through himself. And this month, we get to learn that I am forgiven. That is a part of my identity. That is something that I get to take to heart because of God's love for me. And that's what we get to tell preschoolers and kids all month. And we are so excited to do that. So thank you so much for joining us for the training podcast. We are so excited to continue talking about this forgiveness all month. If you are not joining the conversation on our Facebook group or even just commenting, reviewing, stuff like that on this podcast, we would love for you to jump into the conversation, be a part of this community, because we love the Hyfi community so much. So until next week, we will talk to you later.